All right, well, good morning, Hope City. How's everybody doing today? Okay, fair. That's not great, but fair. And you know what? I think that we might need to interject a little bit of energy in the room, okay? So I felt the same way at my house recently, where I'm thinking okay, we're just kind of hitting a slump here. And so I went on to the App Store, because you can solve anything with the App Store, right? And so I found actually, there's an app, this is free of charge for all of you parents in the room, right? So when you want to have a little bit more fun or start the party, and today's a big deal here at Hope City. I don't know if you know that, but it's Sunday Fun Day, a great party that we're going to have here with all of you. But I downloaded this app. It's called DJ Airhorn, okay? And so this is what it looks like. Actually, it's just it's just this big red button, and you just mash that button anytime you want to get the party started, right? And so, we're doing that in our house, and so I feel like maybe I need to get the DJ Airhorn out for you guys today to get this started. But we're thrilled that you're here. We're excited because we're kicking off a brand new series called Multiple Choice, and what we're doing is we're diving into what does it look like for you and for me with all of the choices that we have in front of us. What does it look like for us to actually choose and experience joy? Now, here's the other thing. I recognize this. We probably threw some of you into some PTSD right now. You're looking at the screen, and what do you see? You see a Scantron test. Anybody remember the Scantron test, taking one of these when you were a kid? What did your teacher always say? Please fill in the bubble all the way. Why? Who cares, right? What does it matter? Do you have your number 2 pencils? I'm sorry, sir. Is there anything other than a number 2 pencil? Do they sell any other kind of pencil? I don't know. I've never owned one, so who knows? But some of you are probably oh, man, this reminds me of school. And really, here's the reality. This reminds me of when I was growing up and taking tests like this, that I would get to the end of this kind of a test, and I would be I don't know that I can answer one more question. I just don't know. I don't know that I can honestly read it, fill in the bubble completely, and then, move on to the next one. And then I would get to the place where I'd be isn't it always just C? Don't you just see all the way down, and then you just fill them all the way in, all the way down, and do this? And that's because I came and I'm I can't answer any more questions. And see, here's the thing that I understand. I know this to be true about your life and at mine. And it's this, that your choices, they actually end up creating your life. In the same way that your choices end up creating your test score, your choices in life end up creating your life. For example, you make every day, you make decisions about what to eat, what to wear, what to purchase, and that begins to develop and shape your life. We start to think about what jobs we should have, what career we're going to chase, and what we're going to pursue, and all that, and that begins to shape your life as well. And then we think about how do we spend our time with, and who do we spend our time with, right? And so we start to get into different relationships, whether that's a dating relationship or a marriage relationship, and that shapes your life. Your life is created by the choices that you make. So here's a multiple choice question for you. How many decisions does the average adult make in one day? I'm going to give you a little bit of think time on that. My teacher friends, they've taught me that you need to let people think for a minute before answering. And so here's the decision. How many decisions does the average adult make in one day? Anybody that would fill in the letter A? Anybody raise your hand? 12,000 decisions a day? Okay. You're confident in the back, 12,000. Anybody with the letter B? 8,000 decisions in a day. Okay. There's a competition going on back there. How about C? 35,000 decisions. Okay. I see that hand. That's a pastor joke. Anybody for D? 19,000 decisions. Right. Okay, if you raised your hand for C, 35,000 decisions, you would be right. And in fact, you get a free t-shirt, okay? So because you're right, you get a free t-shirt today. I told you it's going to be exciting at Hope City. It's going to be awesome. So everybody, you make 35,000 decisions on average every single day. That's a crazy amount of decisions to make. How many of those decisions are made centered around food, right? Let's talk about this. All right, here's the next one. How many of those 35,000 decisions are food related? Any guesses here? A little think time for all my teachers. C, we got some hungry people over here that are I'm making a million choices right now. Okay, so actually, you would be incorrect. Anybody think it was D? 200, of course. Now, this is your opportunity. Everybody can be I did. Of course I thought it was D. Duh, right? Multiple choice. It is actually 226 times a day. You make a decision that's related to food. It's craziness, right? And so here's what you and I, what I've been thinking about, is that we make so many decisions every single day. 35,000 decisions? That's a lot of decisions. And it's no wonder, if we understand that your choices, that they actually create your life, we have an opportunity every single day to make some decisions that bring our life in a positive direction, or could potentially bring our life in a negative direction. In fact, one of the ways that I think about this is I recognize that my own health in my own life, my ability to make decisions, by the end of the day, I get a little bit tired. It's kind of the way that I was when I was in like a senior in high school taking Scantron tests. I'm like a little tired by the end of it, and I'm like, C, right? And it's the same thing at the end of the day, where I'm like, whew, I made a lot of decisions today. And actually, psychologists would call this decision fatigue, where you get to the end of your day, or you get to the end of the decision-making process, and you actually make less informed decisions than you would in the beginning of the day. They studied a parole board, and they were studying this parole board about the hearing that would happen. And it was amazing that the statistics of the inmates that came in front of the parole board that actually were released on parole, the highest percentage of inmates that were released on parole, listen to this, their case was heard before 10 a.m. Why? Because your mind and my mind gets overwhelmed by the decisions that we have to make. And here's the other thing that's so important for us to understand, is that whenever we get so exhausted from making decisions, I need you to understand this, that some decisions in your life, okay, no big deal. Like, what is it that necessarily that you're gonna eat for snack? Like, whatever. That's not a major deal. But some decisions have a compounding nature in them. And I would call them compounding decisions, because these types of decisions, listen to this, they're ones that once you start making that decision, it splits off into another decision that leads you a little bit further down the road, and then you make another decision and another decision, and before you know it, you find yourself in a place that you weren't even really aware that you were headed. In fact, we've said this before, that the decisions you make today determine the stories that you tell tomorrow. Here's what I want to illustrate this. Like, a compounding decision could look like this, particularly in the area of food. Like right now, I'm thinking about food. It's one of my 229 things that I'm thinking about. And so I'm thinking like Five Guys is probably in my future at some point in time, right? So what am I going to eat at Five Guys? The decision between me and Five Guys is not like bun and lettuce wrap. That's not my decision, right? That may have been where going this way, but mine, like, should it be one patty or two, right? Like, is it with bacon or no bacon? Is it with cheese or no cheese? And all of a sudden you find yourself like, I could be going down this trail that leads me all the way to feeling sick after the decisions that I've made. Or we can make decisions with what we eat that lead us to feeling better, feeling healthy. Same thing is true when the way that we spend our time. Netflix has this really cool feature, right, where like if you look at an image, all of a sudden it's a trailer. And then the trailer is like automatically playing the entire season for you. And before you know it, you're like, it's Wednesday. What? I was just at church. How is it Wednesday already? And it's just replaying and playing and playing and playing. And so you and I, we have a decision to make. We say, okay, so how productive do I want to be? How many times am I going to let Netflix automatically advance and show the next episode? Right? How many seasons am I going to stream in one sitting? Am I going to get up? Am I going to take a shower today? Like, should I even get dressed today? And before you know it, you and I, we can find ourselves having made decisions that lead us to being productive or being non-productive. In your life and in mine, we understand that there are compounding decisions that impact you every single day. And we're going to see in this series that Scripture is going to show us that you and I have the ability to make choices. Out of all the multiple choices that you have, we have the ability to make choices that impact not only what happens in our life, but also the joy that we experience in our life. Because look at this. The same thing can be true, is that when we make certain decisions, that they have a compounding effect that lead us somewhere on this scale of living a life of experiencing sorrow to living a life of experiencing great joy. Joy is something that cannot be taken from you. See, the decisions that you make impact the stories that you tell tomorrow. And there are multiple choices around us all the time. We know that there are 35,000 decisions that you're going to make today. Maybe, let's say, it's 11 o'clock. Maybe you've already made 7,000. You have a ton of decisions left ahead of you today. But what if you and I could learn how to make good decisions, how to choose good choices that actually lead us towards experiencing more joy? What if our lives were not only shaped by the choices we made, but actually were pointing us towards joy? What if you and I could experience that? I think we would be all on board for that. And so for the next 4 weeks in our series, Multiple Choice, we're going to be taking a look at what the Apostle Paul, what he has to write about joy. In fact, we're going to be diving into the book of Philippians. And Philippians is an incredible book because it's written by Paul, and it's been written to the church in Philippi. Philippi was this very prosperous Roman colony, and this place, there was a church there that Paul had started, and he was writing them to talk to them about the things that he's heard and the things that is on his mind. And here's the crazy thing, right? Paul is writing to the Philippian church, and he's actually found himself wrongfully imprisoned. So he's writing from prison. He's writing from confinement and chaos. And yet he's writing to this church saying, listen, here's the deal. I want you to know and experience joy in your life. Last weekend I was getting in the car ready to drop my kids off at youth night, my older two, and my son looked at me and he goes, Dad, can I have some money? And, they have pizza and snacks and all this kind of stuff there. And I said, I don't have any money, right? And so I just didn't have any money in my wallet at the time. And so then Tiffany gets in the car, and all of a sudden from the back seat, I hear Noah pipe up. He goes, Mom, Dad won't give me any money. And I was like, son, what? I was like, hold on. And then I got all bent out of shape because I was misunderstood. I was misunderstood that Dad doesn't have money is different than Dad isn't going to give you money. And here's Paul. He's like, I'm in prison, no big deal. Wrongfully in prison, whatever. I'm going to find joy in it. Here my kids misunderstand me, and I'm ready to pull the car over. Like, it's unbelievable. And yet there's something that you and I can learn here. In fact, who do I want to learn from? I want to learn from a guy who says, I'm in prison, whatever, let's be joyful. That's who I want to lean in and learn from. Rather than somebody who's writing this letter from like Hawaii, right? Where somebody's bringing him fresh squeezed juice and here, sir, here's your homemade meal from your chef. Like, no, I want somebody who's saying, I'm in the midst of it. I'm in the thick of life, and I've learned how to be joyful. I've learned the choices that I can make that lead me to joy. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to dive into the book of Philippians. In fact, I would love for you to turn to Philippians chapter 1. That's on page 802 in the Bibles around you. Or you can follow along in the screens behind me. But today we're going to take a look at this first chapter where we're going to identify 3 essential choices for you to live a joyful life. So if you're taking notes this morning, we put them in your programs for you. 3 essential choices that you and I need to make in order to live a joyful life. But interestingly enough, there's this little 3-letter word, joy. In fact, in Philippians, it appears, catch this, 16 times. There's only 4 chapters in Philippians, and 16 times the word joy pops up. In contrast, the first actually 6 books of the Bible, so Genesis through Joshua, joy does not even appear once. Not even one time in the first 6 books of the Bible. But there are 16 references here in 4 chapters. So today we're going to look at the first chapter. We're going to see what Paul says about having joy, how do we choose joy, and all that you and I can learn about implementing joy in our life and living that kind of a life. So here, look, Philippians 1, verse 3 through 6. See what he says. He says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Remember where he is now. Now is in prison. Now is in the midst of chaos and confinement. He says, I'm going to be praying in joy even right now, being confident of this, right? That he who began a good work in you will carry it on until the day of completion in Christ Jesus. Right here, in the very beginning, we see something about Paul. We see that Paul has made a decision. Paul has decided that he's learned something about of all the choices in life, that there's one essential choice for Paul in order to live joyfully. And that's the decision that you and I need to make. And the first thing is this, if you're taking notes with us, is that you and I need to choose to trust God's process. See, don't forget where he is. He's in prison. This is the worst thing that you could imagine. And Paul's saying, no, I'm going to trust God's process in my life. He may be in confinement and he's unjustly jailed, and he's still saying, no, I'm going to trust. See, you and I, we have to trust God's process through all of life, no matter what it may bring. In fact, today I've titled this message, Joy Killers or Killjoys, right? Because there are so many people that will want to try and steal your joy in your life. They'll try and steal the opportunity for you to live a joy-filled life. Does anybody remember Debbie Downer from SNL? Anybody remember Debbie Downer, right? So I'm going to fire up the old DJ air horn because I found that there's actually some other settings on here. So we're going to play around with this for a second. Debbie Downer shows up in my life all the time, okay? So it's like Monday. And Monday, I'm exhausted. Like I've given everything I have on a Sunday. And Monday, I wake up and I'm like, I walk into Detweiler's and I bump into Debbie Downer and she goes, did you hear about lettuce? Did I hear about lettuce? Yeah, you can't eat lettuce anymore. It's got E. coli. And I'm like, really? Like, look at me. Do I look like I run on lettuce? Like, I'm going to be just fine, right? Or then she'll be like, yeah. Did you hear about the Tampa airport? No. Yeah. They're not letting any planes fly today because there's rain in the forecast. I'm not even going anywhere. Why do I care about this? See, this is what I want you to understand, is that you and I, we find ourselves faced with killjoys all the time, with Debbie Downers, with negative Nancys, and they're just like, man, if I could just point out and tell you something about how negative life is, and you're like, but it was just so good just a second ago. Like, now I'm thinking about lettuce that we're not allowed to eat anymore, or the fact that there's planes that are being grounded right now, even though I wasn't planning on having a salad or eating it midair. I don't understand. And we can be absorbed by what Paul calls light and momentary troubles. Light and momentary troubles are one of the fastest ways to derail your joy. One of the quickest ways to lose joy in the midst of anything is to forget that you need to trust the one who began a good work in you. What does Paul say? He says that he who began a good work in you is going to carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. It means that God has never started something that he isn't going to finish. God hasn't started something in your life that he isn't going to see through completion. God hasn't started something in mine that he's not going to complete one day. It may be here on earth, or it may be in heaven one day when I'm present with him. And Paul talks about that in just a few minutes, but he's going to see it through. So what happened this week? Did you mess up? Did you get in an argument with your spouse again? Did you kind of lose your cool in front of the kids? Did you let people down? Did you get in a yelling match? Okay, hold on. Did you feel like that no matter what, you're never going to get it right? And you want to give up? Paul says, no. God isn't giving up on you. You shouldn't give up. And then you need to listen to God's words today, that you need to choose to trust God's process. See, he who began a good work in you is going to carry it through in you. Trust his process. When Tiffany and I first got married, we spent several years living in different apartments, and the joke was, for a long time, I can't say it anymore, but for a long time, we moved almost every single year, and we were in more houses than we were years married. And we finally were able to purchase a home through the help of family and some friends, and we bought this house in New Britain, Pennsylvania. And I was a youth pastor there, and it was a foreclosure. And this was actually several stages later in the process where it started to look really good. And so here's the deal. Like, we bought this house, or before we even bought it, the bank was like, yeah, we'll give you a loan, but you've got to get the water to work and the heat to work. Because up until that point in time, the heater didn't work and there was no water. You'd turn on a tap and nothing would come out. And so we bought this thing because we were like, I think we can make this into something nice. In fact, it's kind of important to have heat in Pennsylvania because we would have days like this. I don't know if you're aware of this. This is what we call snow, okay? So let's say it together. Yeah, good. This is good. You guys are catching on. And so it's cold, and so we needed a heater. And so we were working hard on that. And before we knew it, it ended up that we moved to New Jersey. And when we went to sell this thing, we actually made a profit on it. And I was like, oh, okay, we can do this again. And so then we bought another house in New Jersey, and it was the worst house on the block. We rehabbed it, renovated it, that whole thing from the top floor all the way down to the basement. And again, when we sold it, we were able to turn a profit on our sweat equity. Now we're moving to Florida, and we're moving here to Florida, and I'm thinking, listen, I understand how this works. I know the best thing for us to do, babe. I'm like, we need to buy the ugliest, nastiest house that we can find on the block. Let's take care of that one. We'll like kind of rehab it, restore it, whatever, do what we do, and then we'll be able to turn a profit on it. And she goes, I don't know that that's a good idea this time. I don't know that we should move 1,400 miles away from friends and family and all this kind of thing and buy a house that needs to be rehabbed. And so, because I understand that a happy life is a happy wife, I was like, okay, cool, so we didn't do that. But in the back of my head, I had this sneaking suspicion that we made the worst real estate decision possible. Because we bought a house that just needed some paint and some care. And I was thinking, man, I just don't think this is right. I think that we actually kind of messed ourselves up for the long term, all this stuff. And yet, if I didn't choose to trust God's process, I wouldn't be standing here. I don't know that I'd be standing here right now. Because here's the deal. I thought that we were moving to Florida, and I've had the opportunity to build or rebuild a house for my family, my physical family. And yet God had a different plan for my life than when I first moved here to Florida. God said, no, I've got a different house for you to build. It's actually a spiritual house for your extended family, for all of you guys. And what I'm going to do is do something through you that you can't even see yet. And so in that first little bit, I'm like, this doesn't make sense, God. And then it was revealed to me. And some of you are in that place in your life right now where you're like, it doesn't actually make sense. I'm not getting what I thought I should be getting. I'm not getting what I feel like I deserve. And so it can gnaw at your soul. And yet Paul says that if you're going to experience joy, the kind of joy that your life can be built on, you need to trust God's process. Look what Paul says next, though. He says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. As a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. Because of my chains, most of my brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. Like, who is Paul? Like, who is this guy? Nobody is going to hijack Paul's joy. There's not a situation in his life that's going to take his joy from him. He says, not me, not today. He goes on, he says, it's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Because of this, I'm going to continue to rejoice. See, do you know what else is a killjoy? The thing that can suck the joy out of your life? It's that when you and I get our priorities out of whack. Do you know what Paul's number one priority wasn't? Comfort. Paul didn't say, well, when I get comfortable again, like when I'm not in this prison, when I'm not chained to the wall or chained to this guard, or when I can get my pillow back, my Tempur-Pedic bed, then we'll get serious about preaching the gospel. No, Paul's like, no, my priorities are straight. My priorities are set. In fact, it's oftentimes that we get derailed because of getting misunderstood, right? He's talking about how some people are preaching the gospel, and he's like, but they might have impure motives. Well, have you ever seen somebody do a good thing for a good reason? Sure, we've all seen that. But we've also seen somebody do a good thing for a bad reason. And Paul is saying, yeah, but a good thing still happened. The gospel's still being preached. And so I'm going to be excited about that. I'm going to take joy in that, Paul says. See, don't miss out. that Paul's priority is Jesus. His priority is Jesus, and that Christ is preached no matter what. And so from Paul, you and I can see that if we're going to experience joy, if we're going to, of all of the multiple choices in your life that you're going to experience, you and I, we need to choose God-pleasing priorities. God-pleasing priorities, these things that when you can keep God as the main thing, you won't sweat the small stuff. You won't sweat even wrongful imprisonment, as Paul says. This is why Paul is able to write that because of this, I rejoice. I rejoice in this, and I continue to rejoice because my priorities are right. See, at home with my wife and my kids, when my priorities are right, I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to worry if my wife is happy, if my kids are happy, because my priorities are right. Now, if my priority is me, and it's about my comfort, my experience, my house, my domain, my this, my time, then my priorities have shifted. It's now me being selfish, and it's me putting everything, making the world revolve around me. The priority is wrong. I mean, I bump into so many guys and talk to so many guys that are like, I just don't think I can ever make my wife happy. I can't keep, I don't know what to do. And I say, hey, let's check your priorities. When you get home, what is the most important thing to you? And very often it's like, well, I like to kick my feet up and watch the news or read the paper or read whatever. And I'm like, well, maybe. What if we just dialed it in a little bit, dialed in our priorities a little bit? You won't have to wonder. And the same thing is true in your life. If you're wondering, how do I experience more joy? Let's focus our priorities back on Christ, on God-pleasing priorities. And see, the last essential choice that you and I will ever have to make in order to live a joyful life is found just a few verses later here in chapter 1. Look at what Paul says, and this is an incredible passage of Scripture that Paul is able to write. And he says this, for to me, my decision, the decision that I have made, is that if I live, it's Christ, and if I die, it's gain. If I'm going on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? What's out of all of the choices I can make, the multiple choices I have, what should I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but it's more necessary that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith. That's so through my being with you, again, that your joy in Christ Jesus will overflow on account of me. So let me tell you something. Paul is recognized that happiness, it's not what his ultimate desire is. Because what is happiness? Happiness is based on happenstance or the things that happen to you. Happiness depends on happenings or our circumstances. It's about external forces. And Paul is saying, no. Joy, on the other hand, is internal. It's something that can't be stolen. It can't be swayed. It can't be rocked. It's constant. It doesn't shift. And what we see from this last paragraph from Paul that he's sharing with the Philippians is that you can't have joy without purpose. You can't experience the fullness of the joy that God has intended for your life and for mine without living out God's given purpose in your world. The things that God has for you. But in the moment that you find your God-given purpose in life, joy will not be far behind. Right? Like, I wish I could have videotaped somehow what happened yesterday at Serve Day. Right? There's like a dozen people, and they're working in a yard, and they're cleaning and raking and cutting and trimming and all kinds of different things, right? And I'm telling you, people were sweaty, they're hungry, they're getting worn out physically, and yet they are being filled with joy because of what they're doing. Not a single person in that piece of property was like grumbling or complaining. They were filled with joy because of the opportunity that they had to serve other people. You and I, when we understand our God-given purpose and we live into that God-given purpose, we experience joy like never before. Because all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, it makes sense why I'm living and breathing today. It makes sense that I get to do this. See, Paul's purpose was to live for the one who died for him. He said, I know that for me to live is Christ. To To die is gain. For me to live, I'm going to live in such a way that honors Christ, that shows Christ to every other person. But if I die, that's okay too. I get to go be with God in heaven. See, Paul says that you and I, that we need to live our God-given purpose. And when we live with God-given purpose, in verse 25, he says, convinced of this, I will continue with all of you for your progress and for your joy. This morning, I would love to just ask you a question. And this is like one of those questions that you just ask in your head. Don't answer out loud. Don't raise your hand. This isn't between me, you, or anybody else other than just yourself. But wouldn't you love to have some progress in the areas of joy in your life? Like, wouldn't it be best if people got to the end of your life and they were able to say about you, man, that person was just so joyful. It didn't matter what was going on. They were just filled with joy. See, you and I, of all the multiple choices that we experience, we make 35,000 decisions every day. We have the opportunity to choose joy, to find joy in every circumstance. And here at Hope City, we say this a lot, that we want to partner with you and partner with God to help you take your next steps in your journey of faith. Because we know that faith is not a guilt trip. Faith is a journey. And some of you are taking steps even right now. You're thinking, I'm in church. Like, that is unbelievable. And we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're here. And some of you are saying, but I grew up in church, I've kind of lived it my whole life, but now it's becoming real to me, and there's something that God is wanting to do in my life and through my life. We want to help you take that next step in your journey of faith. Another thing that we say here is we hope that when you show up to Hope City, that you find hope. That you find hope not in anything of what I've said or anybody else that's on this platform has said, but you find hope in Jesus. And that you experience home. That you experience joy when you're here. Paul put it best. He says, we hope that you have progress and joy in your faith. And there's nothing better that I could ask for you. That's why I echo what Paul says. As your pastor, I want you to continue in your life, for your progress, for your joy and faith. And one of the decisions that you make today, whatever that may be, the compounding decisions that lead you closer and closer to joy. I pray that you would make that. Maybe some of you this morning, you actually need to choose to trust God's process. Because you woke up this morning and you were like, this is not the life that I signed up for. And I didn't want it to turn out this way. But remember, God isn't finished. God isn't done yet. That he who began a good work in you will see it through to completion. Continue to choose to trust God's process. Maybe you need to stick to God-pleasing priorities. You're saying, now, you know what, Peter, my life has kind of gotten a little bit out of whack, and I want to bring that back in. Maybe that's even why you felt drawn to come to church today, because you're like, something just doesn't feel right, and I want to bring it back into alignment, to choose God-pleasing priorities. Maybe others of you just need to choose to live God-given purpose in your life. And for all you moms that are like slugging it out in the trenches right now, and you're like waking up in the middle of the night and you're giving everything that you have, don't forget that God has given you that child. He's entrusted you with that child to care for. That's God-given purpose. You get to see that moment as now not an interruption in your day, but as an opportunity to steward what God has put in your hands. Dads, the same thing rings true for you. When you enter into the room and your kids are there, you should bring joy into that room. You should bring joy into their life. Grandparents, teachers, all of you. Whatever it is that you do, what you find yourself showing up on Monday and you walk into the office, God has you in that place for a reason. In fact, we say that if you have breath in your lungs, you have purpose. God is not finished with you. He's started something in you and he's going to see it through to the very, very end. And so this morning, which one of those questions is the hardest for you? You're thinking to myself, I don't know if I could do that. Or I don't know if I want to face that. I wonder, as you think about which one of those questions is the hardest for you, I wonder if that isn't the very place that God is going to transform in you, and that you would see the greatest return on joy in your life. That the little investment, the decisions that you make, the multiple choices that you choose, kind of to ratchet the dial up in that area. Wouldn't it be amazing if God says, no, watch this. Watch what I do in the area of joy in your life as you follow through obediently. See, my prayer for you and throughout this entire series is that as a church, as a people, as an individual, that we would learn to be joyful people. That no matter what is in front of us, of all the thousands of choices that you have today, that you would choose joy. You would choose joy over happiness. You would choose joy over pleasure. That you would find joy in Jesus.